working drummer.
Now kick it.
Hey everyone, Zach Albetta here for Working Drummer Podcast,
This is the Working Drummer Podcast,
is Colin
serving
Agnew.
up perspectives,
Colin has
experiences,
been
and
based in
stories from
Atlanta
ground-level
since college
working pros.
and is one of the
Advice,
busiest
tips,
drummers in the
and
region.
secrets on how to
He's
build a
created
career
a
in the
niche for
music
himself
business.
as the go-to guy for artists and producers who are on the more rootsy acoustic side of things, whether it's singer-songwriters, bluegrass, folk, Americana, Dixieland, anything along those lines. He's also extremely well-versed in different types of Latin music and hand drumming, and one of the things that sets him apart is that he incorporates those styles and those instruments into the drum set in some really cool and unique ways. He's made a lot of friends around here as a result, and is just constantly busy, gigging, touring, recording, really doing it all. And every time I see him play, he's behind a different setup of drums, hand drums, gadgets, toys, noisemakers of all sorts. Real quick before we get to that, if you haven't already, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we want to see what you all are up to out there. So you can post your pics and videos of the gigs you're doing using the hashtag Working Drummer, and we'll be looking for them and reposting them. We're sponsored this week by Aquarian Drumheads, makers of the multi-purpose Super Pad, both a great feeling pad for quiet practice and a responsive drum mute for low-volume music making. Every drummer needs to turn down the volume sometimes. The Super Pad by Aquarian Drumheads can keep the drummer playing all of the time. You can check out the Super Pad and the rest of Aquarian's heads and accessories at aquariandrumheads.com. So here we go. Hope you enjoy my talk with Colin Agnew. You just returned from South by Southwest.
Correct.
Who were you there with?
I was there with a band from Athens called Cicada Rhythm.
And describe that band.
They're a kind of a folk duet. She plays upright bass. She's a Juilliard graduate.
Who is she?
Her name is Andrea DeMarcus. And her better half, or lesser half, name is David Kersless. They're actually both from Atlanta, but have lived all over and I think met up in Athens. And he plays guitar, and they both write the music, and they both, they kind of flesh it out together. And he sings a little bit like Oliver Wood.
Yeah,
You would say he's got a little bit of that going on, and she sounds like Billie Holiday.
Wow.
So it's kind of a pretty interesting vocal combination.
Yeah.
The writing styles are very different, but together it's sort of a cool Americana folk thing.
And they usually play duo, but for kind of special occasions or bigger things, they bring you in to play set.
They'll bring me out, or I don't think we've ever played as a quartet. Yes, we have. Sometimes they bring a pedal steel player.
Okay.
A guy named Pistol they like to use.
I like him already.
Yeah.
So what was South by Southwest like? Had you been before?
No, I'd made a very concerted effort never to do that before.
They made it worth your while.
By design, I never wanted to submit myself to that insanity. Mm-hmm. And it was about what I expected. I don't think I was really surprised by any of it. And everyone I've talked to for the past 10 years says, it's worth going, but damn, is it fucking crazy out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thousands of bands, just thousands.
Right.
And I guess the one thing that did surprise me out there was that the amount of shows that happen, most of them are not South by Southwest officially sanctioned shows.
Okay.
So they have showcases and they have stuff happening officially on their roster all over Austin, at literally thousands of venues. Those same venues, as well as a bunch of others, have shows all the time anyway during that week that are not officially sanctioned. So, I met up with some friends out there that were out on the road with their band. A group called the Banditos from Birmingham were out there, and they've done European tours. They're a bigger act, and I met them out there, and they're like, "Yeah, we have 10 shows in the next 4 days, but none of them are South by shows."
Oh my God!
Like, how? I don't know how you end up doing that, but
so when you hear somebody say we're playing at South by Southwest, it could very likely be just a show that's in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, I think South by Southwest just has become synonymous with that week in Austin, Texas. If you're in Austin, it's hard to escape the madness that is South by Southwest.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I did it once, and I there's probably not another group that I would want to go out and do that sort of thing with. they're very easy to get along with on the road, and we all fit into one car, which is nice.
Yeah, perfect. Was there anything that you were kind of pleasantly surprised about by South by in terms of bands you saw or?
Well, absolutely. It's hard not to see something that you've never heard of before,
right?
But it's impossible to get to see everything you want to see,
right?
It's just the entire city is swarmed with bands at all times.
Yeah.
And no one plays for longer than 45 minutes anywhere.
Right. Right.
But
and tell me about I remember you saying you kind of worked you worked a little deal with Cicada Rhythms record company about a backline drum set.
Yeah, their label is one of the few doing any kind of tour support anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're based mostly out of Athens. They're called Normal Town Records, which is sort of like a subsidiary of New West Records. Okay. And they, I'm sure they've sent bands out there before, but they talked to me ahead of time, like, okay, for all your South by shows, I want to make sure that you have a back line. I'm like, okay, great.
Right.
Because those load-ins can be maddening.
Right, and it's not just the load-in. It's like, I mean, you were talking about drummers you'd heard of who were walking half a mile or something with their gear.
Yeah, the one of the biggest downsides to South by is that there's no artist parking anywhere. So it was common, like, you pay $35 to park in a parking lot half a mile away, and then you haul all your gear up for a half an hour show.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm not really selling this too much. You should totally do it next year.
No, my point is that, like, you were able to, finagle it so that you didn't have to deal with that as a drummer, as a hired person to, So drummers, if you're ever playing South by Southwest, get with the record company and put the bite on them hard.
Yeah, and follow up with every venue you're playing to make sure that they have a kit there ready to go.
Ugh, were you confronted with any disasters kit wise?
I'm not a disaster. The first show we played, because like I said, Cicada Rhythm is a folk act. It was for the Folk Alliance showcase, and I don't think they'd had a drummer all weekend or all week when we got there. And I was like, yeah, I play drums. I mean, I don't really want to load all my stuff in, but that was actually the easiest schlepping situation. It was just parking right outside. But the kit they had in there was missing, half the hi-hat stand, and it was pretty much what you'd expect.
I see you all over town playing with, like, anytime I get wind of a sort of singer-songwriter thing or a roots vibe or any of that, I look at the band, I say, oh, that sounds cool. I look at their YouTube. Invariably, it's Colin Agnew on drums. He's everywhere with this stuff. So how did you? I mean, my point is, you seem to be the go-to guy in Atlanta for the acoustic singer-songwriter, rootsy, bluesy, jazzy, sort of that whole vibe. Yeah. So is that something you intentionally carved out, or?
I can't say that was by design, no. I can't say that was an intentional thing. Most of it probably precipitated by hooking up with Adron's project about 5 years ago. Okay. Which was, that just sort of happened through a couple other bands that we knew together, and she was singing backup with another local act, and we were both on the same showcase. And I guess through that, I started doing more shows at Eddie's Attic and being put on bills with other songwriters, and that, network of people just sort of generated a lot of work.
And for people listening, we should describe who Adron is and what she does, and what Eddie's Attic is and the role that place plays.
Sure. So let's start in a more broad sense. Eddie's Attic is sort of like the songwriter haven in Atlanta.
Right.
It's the listening room in Atlanta. Started back in the early 90s, primarily by a guy named Eddie Owen, hence his attic. And right. Yeah, he has since moved on. About 6 or 7 years ago, I guess he moved up to Duluth, and he has a spot up there called the Red Clay Theater. But he has always been a huge supporter of songwriters. So people who started there, John Mayer started there, Sean Mullins got his start there, Sugarland got their start there. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, the place has been there for 25 years.
Right.
So that spot I started playing at a lot with local songwriter named Adron, who is, I still think she's absolutely the best songwriter I've ever met, and the most adventurous and daring with her creativity.
Yeah.
But she does heavily influenced by like the 60s Brazilian songwriters like Caetano Veloso, Luis Bonfá, guys like that. So she's a classical guitar player, self-taught singing in Portuguese and French fluently.
Right.
Also English, but her songwriting it always gets me into places that I don't really have the opportunity to get into otherwise. So this like folky, poppy, sometimes funky, very improvisatory at times, but also very crafted and delicate music.
Yeah.
That also incorporates all of this Latin and world music that I have been kind of immersed in for 15 years.
Right. She has a total Brazilian vibe, although it's not straight up. It's tinged definitely with that.
Right.
And I was blown away. You mentioned she's an incredible singer and an incredible songwriter, but her guitar playing is absolutely insane, and her harmonic language is huge, and the stuff she chooses to play under what she's singing, just really knocked me out.
Watching her craft a song is one of the most. I mean, it's on par with the insanity that is watching her do vocal stacks in the studio. You know, her, like you said, her harmonic language, her ear for harmony it comes more naturally to her than anyone else I've ever met. And it's very impressive and kind of creepy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And she's got you singing some backup too, right?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. The learning curve there was not easy. But we started, for a year or two, we were doing some weekly gigs, dinner music at some restaurants and local spots. And just as a duet where I was doing mostly percussion. And I'd been doing stuff like that for a long time, but to keep things fresh, I always wanted to work on the background vocal bag.
Right.
And what better opportunity to do that than when you have a great singer that you're singing with or playing with, and you get to play with them all the time. So I kind of forced my hand a little bit with that. I'm like, I'm just going to start bringing a vocal mic. Is that okay? She's like, Colin, I don't know. I've heard you sing before. But, you know, it took convincing her just to give me the opportunity, and kind of begging her to, like, what do you want me to sing here? And how in the world does that note work over what you're playing there? You know?
It's interesting that you talk about sort of taking it upon yourself to start singing and to build your background chops, because I think a lot of drummers, they either they never get into that, or they only get into it when they're asked to, or when they're forced to, or when they audition for a band that says you must sing backup, or like that's when they do it.
Sure.
But have you found that, like, taking that initiative, and I mean, it was in a friendly place with Adron. I wouldn't recommend just like asking to sing backup on any old gig, but what has that done for you in terms of being well-rounded, and what made you want to take that initiative to start singing?
I think I'm always trying to do something new. I really get off on the feeling of learning something and being able to incorporate it into what I'm doing. And, you know, but at the same time, that should always be in deference to the music that you're playing.
Right.
If I show up to a gig and the only thing that I really feel like I can add to it is playing a shaker, that's fine with me, and I love it. But with Adron, there's so many doors you could open, so many avenues you can take with the music, that I end up doing a lot. And one of the most amazing things about her music, obviously, is the harmonic content. And I feel like it benefits a lot from having another voice there. So it was another challenge to try to do that.
And since you started doing that, have you only done it with Adron, or have you been singing with other people?
Well, I've been singing with a lot of other people too.
Yeah.
I should go back and say that I started my background vocal stuff started singing with some other Latin bands, and they were just like, everybody sing the chorus together, and it was all in Spanish, and I had no idea what they're saying. So just sort of shouting, and that was fun. That was a nice doorstep getting into singing a lot more complicated stuff.
Almost every time I've seen you play, you're playing some sort of a hybrid kit, and you'll usually have the kick and snare, but there's almost always shakers and bells and extra stuff on the hi-hat and just tons and tons of sounds. What made you want to do all that instead of just going into percussion or just going into drum set?
Wow, that's going back pretty far, I think.
Well, let's go back.
Yeah, I think I've always felt like there are so many great drummers in Atlanta, especially, that grew up playing in the church and that have chops for days. And I'm so happy that those people exist, in part because I don't have to do that. It's like, I don't ever have to worry about the music world being, the music world wanting for gospel drummers and guys that come from that background. And that's a sound that's become so pervasive, and it's wonderful, but it's kind of been liberating for me to realize I'm never going to do that. I don't want to. That's not where I come from. So when I was much younger, I was doing mostly classical percussion, piano, and drum set.
Now, what is much younger?
Middle school, high school. So
okay.
14, 15, when I was first really trying to, when I was first realizing that I was developing a sound of my own. And so kind of deciding where I wanted to go musically.
Classical piano, drum set, and
classical percussion.
And classical, okay.
Right. All the stuff you do in school. The typical well-rounded thing. But hand percussion is never a thing that you really get into in schools, in the United States at least. It's sort of this other thing, and it's like, if you come from a Latin American country, then that's sort of a thing that you can own. But otherwise, it's saved for music conservatories that you ever get a chance to study that stuff.
Right. I interviewed a percussionist in LA named Cassandra Kokocius a little while back, and she studied hand percussion at Cal Arts, which is one of the few places you can do that. But we were talking about how in high school and especially in college, if you want to do percussion, it's either the classical thing or the drum set thing.
Absolutely.
So what was how did you get into all that hand percussion?
I guess the impetus happened I went to an arts high school, a performing arts high school in Savannah Arts Academy.
You grew up in Savannah, right?
And they worked out something with, at the time it was called Savannah on Stage, and later became the Savannah Music Festival. But they worked out an artist in residency program at the school with the winner of the piano competition, I believe in 2002, 2003. Who's an Israeli guy named Alan Yavnai, who teaches at Berkeley.
Okay.
So he won the competition. He started coming down to the school once a month to give 2 or 3 days of master classes and work with the big band and do all of this crazy stuff. I mean, the man is brilliant. And he, as part of the deal, he always wanted to bring with him a percussionist, which, looking back, I was like, man, what a random choice. But that was the turning point in my life for percussion. So for about a year, he would bring down this guy named Ernesto Diaz, who's one of the hand percussion instructors at Berkeley. And I remember sitting in rehearsal one day, the first time they came down, and he pulled down the congas from the closet. I was like, wow, somebody's going to play those things. They're just always over there, and we use them in some pieces where you're playing in wind band and like hit these things with sticks.
Right.
we need that sound. But he pulled them down, and he hit one slap on it, and I had never heard anything like that before. I remember just turning around and like, do that again. What was that sound you just brought out of that drum? I've never heard that. And I was hooked. And every month they would come down, I would spend 2 days in a practice room with this guy, just getting him to just diving in as much as I could, getting him to show me stuff. But it was always something that I couldn't do regularly in school. There wasn't an instructor regularly, so bought a set of congas. I studied with him every month. When I moved to Atlanta a few years later, I totally immersed myself in the Latin music scene where I could get my hands on these instruments, and it just really, it was like this, it was like this secret obsession where I had all of the stuff at school. I could be working on my jazz chops and going to the sessions, and that was still what I think I convinced myself that I wanted to do for years, and still be well-rounded with all of the classical stuff. But whenever I wasn't in school or in that mindset, all I really wanted to do was go and get my hands on all these other sounds. These sounds were just so exotic, and they were in everything. They were in every kind of music when you start opening your ears up.
Yeah.
And that. Fast forward 10 years later, and I probably have 40 tambourines in my house that I use that I pick from when I'm doing a recording session. Like, it's got to be the perfect one.
Right. It's cool you mentioned how pervasive percussion is just in every kind of music, like in learning pop music or whatever. If you got a bunch of tunes to learn for, a wedding band or something, almost no matter what era it is, like 60s, 70s up until today, you're going to hear triangle, hand drums, congas, tambourine, shakers, like all kinds of shit.
Absolutely.
So was that, did you see the potential right away for you to like combine the drum set and the percussion into what you do today?
I think I tried. I tried, and I saw what worked, but by and large, they were still two separate worlds. So I was involved in some salsa bands in college and some Brazilian pop bands, and it was always, there was a drummer and there was percussion. So they were still pretty separate.
And you usually were the percussion in that equation?
One or the other.
Either or.
Okay. I kind of split my time from that, and that was good. I mean, I never wanted to be pigeonholed as a musician, and that was something I always tried to avoid. So, but as far as incorporating them together, that sort of happened naturally over about 10 years. I was playing with a guitar player where we would just play duet music, sometimes 6 nights a week for years. And it was all instrumental, no vocals. And he was 7-string classical guitar player, and he just wanted percussion. But, I was not satisfied just showing up with a pair of congas, some wind chimes, and a pandeiro. I wanted to do more and more, so I kept adding on and trying my hand at doing more things simultaneously to really fill out the sound. Yeah. And that, I think that sort of ended up being where I started putting the kits together, where I have some sort of kick drum action with the foot, some sort of hi-hat or left foot clave thing happening, and then shakers all over literally shakers just like sit around all over the place. Right. Snare. So it ended up being just this kind of morphed thing. Yeah. That now it's like whatever gig I get called for, I like to kind of craft a kit around the music that I'm playing.
Yeah, and so I want to talk about that, but first I want to talk about the basically the practice you had to do to develop what you do and what I see you doing today. Because on the average gig, you're just busting out a lot of really complex coordination that doesn't really look or sound complex, but if you're a drummer and you know how coordination works, I look at you and I'm like, that's some shit he had to practice. Maybe for a while. I don't know. I mean, did that coordination just come to you?
I think I've always said the best practice is when you're playing in front of people. So there's some of the basic stuff. I would sit at home and shed for a long time, but there's only so long that I can really zone in and sit there playing a shaker and a left foot clave while playing a tumbao pattern with my left hand before I just start going crazy. Right. If there's not a song there, it's kind of hard to just do that. But just getting the basic stuff down, and then just getting on a gig and hanging out with people and working that stuff out that's been my practice for most of my professional career. That's been the majority of where I work out that coordination stuff, those sounds, what works, what combinations don't work.
Yeah.
And
I was also really just sort of it made me happy to see and hear really complex coordination like that being used for such sort of selfless and musical aims, because we see so many DVDs with Marco Miniman and Thomas Lang or whatever, and they're busting out the left foot clave thing and they're soloing in 7 with 2 other limbs, and it's amazing. I mean,
amazing.
It really is.
Absolutely.
But I don't find it musical, and that it was just great to see someone apply that really extreme independence for really musical results. Were you ever sort of tempted to really develop the solo chops and the solo aspect of that coordination? I
think to some degree everybody's tempted. We've all seen those videos and are all impressed. It always leaves an impression on us, like, wow, I could probably do that. If I sat down, we all want to believe that. I could probably work that stuff out and get on a clinic somewhere and make my own DVD and become a superstar for soloing. But that thought is always very fleeting for me. Like, well, where does that get me? What's the good in that? If I'm not playing with other people and making music for people that don't know anything about music, and they can still shed a tear or get up and dance or whatever, have some sort of extreme emotional response, the people who don't know what's happening, then what good is what I'm doing? There is that, I guess, the selflessness there, because it all comes down to the whole thing, the whole picture of what's happening on stage or in a corner or whatever the hell you're playing.
I remember, it reminds me when I saw Derek Roddy give a drum clinic when I was living in Kansas City, and I was friends with one of the guys that worked at the drum shop there, Explorers, and they were sponsoring the whole thing. So my buddy invited me to just kind of come hang out before the show and talk with Derek and just hang or whatever. And it was at a high school, and he was traveling with one other guy, just like a roadie assistant type guy, and they were traveling in a van full of his drums, and they unloaded the van and they set him up and they set up the amps and the mics and all that shit, and he did the clinic and he played with tracks. And I didn't hang out afterwards, but I realized like him and this one other guy are going to put the drums back in the van and drive the van to the next clinic, where it just doesn't sound like very much fun. Like I want to play music with bands. I want to do shows, and just driving your shit around in a van playing solo doesn't,
that doesn't sound very fun. Unless the guy helping you set up is your boyfriend or your brother or something, unless someone you really want to hang out with for a couple of weeks.
Right. But even then, the playing experience is like, well, let's play with these tracks again.
Yeah.
Let's bust out the double kick clinic again.
I think I remember probably the best, in some ways the best, but in a lot of ways the worst drum clinic I ever saw. I was in college. It was Billy Joel's main drummer for years, Liberty DeVito, who's just the saltiest New York Italian guy you've ever met in real life.
Billy Joel got a salty New York guy to play drums?
Go figure.
Big shocker.
I mean, the guy was so crass and so just brutally honest with everything he did. Literally showed up, and he played with tracks, but he played with all Billy Joel tracks. And the only thing he said when you show up to the clinic, "Hey, I'm Liberty DeVito. This is what I did for 30 years. And he hit play, and he just played the loudest shit you've ever heard, just like playing along with these tracks for 35 minutes. He stopped at one point. He was like, "This song, I told Billy not to release this song. It sucked." But, so the clinic itself was like, man, what am I learning here? But maybe later I look back and think, that dude is maybe a little bit like me. He doesn't want to just sit there and chop in front of a bunch of people and say, look at all this stuff I do. He's saying, this is what I do. I played songs, and everybody knows a song that he played on.
Right.
And usually nothing about the drums stood out in those recordings. He played the song. Every song he did something different. And he really crafted it. I mean,
yeah. And I guess that was my point with all this coordination you're doing, because to look at you from the drummer's standpoint, my drummer brain is like, holy shit, look at all this stuff he's doing. But if I just listen or if I hear it on a recording, nothing stands out. Like everything is appropriate and tasteful and cool, and so that's my commendation to you.
Thanks. Yeah.
You mentioned crafting setups for individual groups or songs or whatever. Do you have a formula for doing that, or is it just kind of in the moment?
Formula? No, there's not really.
Are there any voices that like you can't live without?
No, not really.
Really?
No, if it all just depends on whatever the music is. I mean, typically, especially if I'm playing with a songwriter, there are things that they can't live without, and that typically follows.
Or that they can't live with.
or that, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, we've all been that. Like, do not bring a crash cymbal to this gig. You will not hit a crash cymbal. No triangles. Nothing above 8,000 hertz. But no, not really a formula. I mean, maybe to the extent that I'm right-handed. I always put the kick on the right side. But I've actually been thinking about trying to change that up lately too.
Well, yeah, but you're right-handed, but right away I think of like when most of the time when you play a shaker, if I'm not mistaken, you do it left-handed. So you play the shaker left-handed and like a backbeat on with your right hand. So
I guess that's true.
You're switched around already. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I think all that came from doing a multi-percussion rig for years and having a right-handed conga setup. So if your shaker's in your right hand, you can't really be crossing over too much to hit at the low drum. So yeah, that was just a natural thing. But also, it seems to make more sense that way. It's a little logical. If you're playing a shaker in your left hand, your right hand's free to move around the kit a little more.
Yeah, it's totally logical, and that's what made me notice it, because I've done some some shaker action with the backbeat whatever before, but I'm used to having right hand lead.
Right.
So I did the shaker with my right hand, and as soon as I saw you, I was like, look at all the snare and tom stuff he can do with his right hand. That makes total sense.
But I try not to be too formulaic with it. I mean, if it works, it works, and not everybody's writing, a song that sounds like nothing else you've ever heard. So
right.
There are certain things that work and certain things that don't. But I do try to always approach the gig song by song. How am I going to benefit, or how's the song going to benefit from what I'm doing most appropriately and most effectively? So,
yeah,
and that's sort of the fun game about every new gig. I think sometimes, like, if I was a bass player, I'd probably get bored, or if I just had one instrument that I was working with, and every gig I just had to show up and that's all I had. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's amazing that people can do that and find some way to still give to a song. But there's something exciting about trying to develop and craft that whole palette for every gig that you have.
Right. Which of my 40 tambourines is going to work for this song?
Exactly. And what part of my body am I going to hang it from to jiggle at this one spot? Yeah.
You mentioned college. Where did you go to college?
I started my college career at Florida State University studying with Leon Anderson.
Okay.
And I was not there for very long. And then...
Do you care to say why? Or
no, not really.
All right, yeah.
Well, Tallahassee was not the city for me. So,
right.
I realized that pretty quickly. And, it's a great school. It's a great music school. But the town was not... didn't support a wide enough array of music and musicians for me at the time. So
gotcha.
I ended up moving to Atlanta and then finished my degree at Georgia State.
Okay. And who'd you study with there?
A lot of people. Yeah. I started with a guy named Billy Dennett, who's the drum set instructor when I started. Studied classical stuff with Stuart Gerber. I studied drum set then with Kenan Bhutto for 4 years. I was there for a while.
Yeah. Tell people about Kenan Bhutto. Because since I've gotten here, I've heard a lot about Kenan Bhutto, and he sounds like somebody that people should hear about.
Oh, absolutely. He's sort of like Atlanta's musical Dalai Lama. Kenan Bhutto is a self-given name.
Mm-hmm.
He is one of the most fabulous drum set players I've ever heard. A consummate artist in every sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
He's taken, I guess you could call them pilgrimages down to Belize for many years, where he learned all about drum building, chopping down a tree, hollowing out the wood, skinning it up. So he's developed his own drums called the Aya drums, and has since he has a group called the Aya Drummers, and he has his whole folkloric language that he developed on the drums. The first lesson we ever had, he was just come over to my apartment and we'll hang out and we'll just play some hand drums, which I thought was great. I was like, okay, wonderful. There's a teacher here that has his own hand drum style, his own percussion half of his brain. He's also teaching drum set, so I can get all of this stuff. And I show up to his house, and it's the most minimalist home I've ever seen. Like 300 square feet. It's got some drums in the corner, a bicycle, and a bed that he made, like the bed frame that he made. And wow. He lives. He has a family now, but before, maybe 10 years ago, he was living like an ascetic, almost.
Wow.
urban ascetic.
Yeah.
But that's him as a person. Him as an artist is just one of the most beautiful things you could ever experience, is getting to play with him or just be in a room with him making music. Mm-hmm. It's pure artistry and pure honesty.
And he had kind of a former life as a full-time touring jazz drummer, correct?
Yeah, he toured with Nina Freelon for 15 years, I think.
Okay. And his former name was Woody Williams.
Woody Williams.
Right. So if you search YouTube or whatever, you'll...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And we'll put links up for him and Adron and all these people you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kenan Bhutto is a name that pops up frequently around Atlanta and is invariably sort of in reverence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. He, it's hard to catch him. He doesn't play. He's not on the scene all the time. But like I said, he's got a family and he's doing his own thing now. Mm-hmm. He's always, any encounter that you have with him is always a good one.
Yeah.
It always leaves an impression. So
yeah.
Studying with him for 3 or 4 years was one of the highlights of my musical growing up, I think.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you did one of the things that I recommend to most college students is to pick a city where you want to live and play and go to school there.
Right.
So talk about your transition from academic life into professional life in Atlanta.
Oh, that's a fun subject. So in that, there's no way to do that without talking about the whole secret obsession with percussion, and that kind of being the scene that I really came into my own dealing with. When you go to school, if you're a jazz drummer, everyone always hears the same stuff. Go out and hit the jam sessions up. Go out and cut your teeth. All this lingo that ended up just not resonating with me as time went by. And I did, playing the wedding gigs, playing all the jazz gigs you're supposed to do, learning tunes, all of this stuff. But then I met the guitar player I was talking about earlier, the 7-string guitar player that I played with for 10 years. Mm-hmm. I met him through another friend of mine named Raphael, who's a fantastic drummer, percussionist. And through him, he sort of introduced me into this whole scene of working Latin musicians.
Yeah.
And I started playing gigs. I started getting gigs immediately. And my interest in percussion, I guess, was enough to to propel me into that scene. Because at this point I'd been playing some hand drums. I've been playing some hand drums for 6 or 7 years. So I had a little bit of that worked out, but just getting on the scene and that opening up my ears to so many different things.
Yeah.
And I remember a pivotal moment for me, academic versus moving into a real world situation was playing at this nightclub in Atlanta with this Brazilian pop band all my friends. The band's not around anymore. They're called Rua Six. We used to go and sit in with them a lot on Friday nights, and it'd be me and 2 other percussionists and drums, guitar, bass, lead guitar, and we'd end the night with a huge samba batucada drum line.
Wow. And,
everybody on stage is sweating. Everyone in the audience is sweating and dancing and, beers flying everywhere. And it was so much positive energy.
Yeah.
And I look around and everyone on stage is smiling. Like, it's impossible not to smile at one another. Like, this is the first time I think I've been on stage in my life where everyone in the audience is having an amazing time and everyone on stage is having an amazing time. When that sort of hit me, it's like never in my life playing jazz gigs, and this is nothing against jazz as a pursuit,
right?
But I've never been on a gig before where every musician was so egoless that they're just looking around and they're just grooving and having a good time and smiling at one another.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's the experience that I want to have on stage. I don't want to be on stage where everyone is so sucked up into their own egos, thinking about what's the next cool thing I can play to impress someone.
Right. And jazz is not the only place that happens.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. I want to play songs.
Yeah.
I want to, get on stage with a bunch of dudes that just want to groove their asses off, and people dance, or people, whatever the impulse is or whatever the result is, but to be on stage with people who are really there with each other, and being present together.
Yeah. You're reminded me a lot of something that percussionist Cassandra mentioned, because she went to DePaul University in Chicago to study classical percussion, and while there, outside of school, she got turned on to flamenco music, and that opened up the whole world of hand percussion and world music and all that. But, the point is, you had a similar experience where, like, you're going to school and studying certain things, but you were also open to other music and other people that were active in your area, and that's where you found, like, whoa, this is what I want to do. So, I think it's important for college students to absolutely, college offers a lot of career paths that are lucrative and fulfilling and all that. But if you get the blinders on and just spend all your time on campus and aren't out in the city, with where the actual music is happening, there's a lot to be discovered there.
There's a lot to be discovered.
Yeah. Especially in a place like Atlanta or Chicago or, any big city.
Yeah.
And some of the small cities too. I grew up in Santa Fe. You grew up in Savannah. And they're probably not going to get much national attention, but there is really cool music and musicians doing cool stuff, even in those small markets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to making the effort to get out and put yourself in maybe less than familiar territory, musically or socially or whatever. It's just, it's for me, it's been the biggest benefit.
Yeah.
To really opening my ears up to new things. And
interesting that you mentioned socially too, because I think college can be kind of, it's supposed to be a socially stimulating environment, but I think it can also be stifling.
Absolutely.
And people who get out of college, especially musicians, don't know how to hang.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And hence you get most, I would say the majority of people who go from studying music in school and continue in a career involving music, the majority of them are going to end up teaching. They're going to remain in this cycle of academia and not get out and put themselves outside the box a little bit. You say, wow, there's a guy over here who's never been to school in his life. He's never studied anything, but I want to listen to him play.
Yeah.
He can teach me something.
I want to play with that guy.
I want to play with that guy. He's having a ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I think in a lot of ways, socially and there are a lot of blinders that school can put on. Speaking of that, I know quite a few guys that play around full time. They're full time musicians in Atlanta. Have never studied anything. They've learned everything that they know playing on the street, playing with bands, hanging out, just being on the scene, not studying. And some of them have gotten farther than others, but some people I know, I'd rather have a guy with a good attitude that can hang. I'd rather hire them for the gig any day of the week than someone who just plays the part and
Right.
asks for their check and then leaves and doesn't hang out.
The other group that you're pretty active with is Blair Crimmins. Mm-hmm. I forgot. It's Blair Crimmins and the
Hookers.
and the how could I forget that?
How could you forget? Yeah.
Blair Crimmins and the Hookers. Mm-hmm. So quite a departure stylistically from Adron, or it's not a straight up singer songwriter thing. How would you describe Blair Crimmins?
Well, Blair is a songwriter. He for many years he was in a pretty well renowned rock band in Atlanta for years called Bishop Dawn, mm-hmm. and had sort of a massive transition about 6 or 7 years ago, and decided he wanted to only write in the style of 1920s and 30s ragtime and Dixieland music. Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. and he's an incredibly clever craftsman, lyrical craftsman especially, and he's he put together the band the Hookers, and we tour around a lot. And for me, when he called me for the gig, he had been transitioning out of his previous drummer and called me for a string of gigs. I was like, well, I've never done that before. That mm-hmm. sounds awesome. Yeah. And of course I want to get out on the road. And so
right.
I did that, and the band consists of tenor, banjo, piano, upright bass, 3 horns, and drum set. And
guitar.
Yeah, he doubles between.
Oh, on the banjo and okay.
and sort of a gypsy guitar.
Right.
Which is it's a pretty cool thing. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And that seems like a gig where you don't really get to be as creative with your parts or your voicings or your orchestration or whatever, as you do with somebody like Adron.
I suppose so. Yeah, there's not an infinite amount of freedom with playing in that group, as opposed to with Adron, who's I'm kind of involved heavily in her writing process, so I get to craft whatever I want.
Right.
We take it to, take the song to Mars or wherever the hell it's going to go.
Right.
But playing in a band that has a pretty strict, relatively speaking, a stricter song form.
Yeah, I think it's just a more concrete genre.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even that, there's been some departures from that lately. We just got finished cutting a record, and some of the stuff on there is closer to like a Harry Nilsson backbeat vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's been good for me. Absolutely.
Stretch you a little bit stylistically.
It kind of scratches that jazz itch that I haven't been able to scratch for a while.
Right.
Although it's not it's not completely out of the box. It's got a box with it, but the best thing about that band are the dudes that I get to hang with.
Yeah.
Being on the road with the right guys, like I said, is it makes it all worth it.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you have the same experience I do in those situations where you don't get to be super creative. You just have a more specific role to play. And in situations like that, I really look forward to situations like that because I feel like I'm actually enjoying the music more. I'm thinking less about the crazy shit that I've come up with that I now have to execute, and I just kind of get to play backbeats and listen to the music go by. And
sure.
Do you have that experience?
Absolutely. I think no matter what you do, the sign of like a real musician is someone who can find joy and find something to learn from any situation. Because there's no one who can play everything all the time, and it's just naturally gifted with that. So in that group, I'd never played in a Dixieland band before, and the idea maybe for some people like, wow, you just want to play like 2-beat all night long, and a lot of times it is that. But being able to do that consistently and really, like I said, get people dancing, have that connection with people, I have no problem sitting there playing one thing for an hour.
Yeah.
That's great.
And you mentioned recording. You've done a fair amount of recording over the years in Atlanta. Has most of that been with the artists and the groups that you play with, or do you do some hired gun work for whoever needs your services?
probably the majority of the recording work that I've done has been hired gun, freelance stuff. Someone calling me and they're like, "We need a conga track on this song. Come in and do that," or we need a drummer for this whole record, or,
right.
And it's always something new, and that's really exciting too.
Yeah. And has that come about through cultivating relationships with artists, engineers, producers, all of the above?
All of the above.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Where do producers hang out? We know where the musicians hang out. Where do the producers hang out?
Usually smoking in the back of coffee shops or just hanging out in studios.
Right.
Meeting producers and engineers. Yeah, I've met most of the producers I've met have been through an artist. You meet an artist at a gig. Either they're there watching someone you're playing with, or they've come in to hear you, or whatever it is, and they introduce you to their producer, and the network just continues to grow. Trying to make everybody. Of course, you never can make everybody happy, but with the intention, I feel like on stage and off stage is always to really make a personal connection with someone and be friendly.
Yeah.
That gets you everywhere.
Right.
So,
when is the Blair Crimmins record coming out?
It should be out by the end of May, I think.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a late spring release, so we can tour on it this summer.
Cool.
I'm looking forward to that one. Had a few others come out this year that I worked on last year. Another one I'm excited about is the Adron record that we've been kind of recording for the past 5 years. It's one of those projects.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get in the studio and you record an album in 2 days. Sometimes you record a song every couple of months for 5 years.
Yeah. But that one is imminent.
That one will be out this year.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Looking forward to that. And are you going to tour with her as well, I assume?
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, great, man. Thanks so much for talking.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
Thank you, brother.
Don't you want to play with that guy? Don't you want to hang out with that guy? If you go to workingdrummer.net and look at the pictures of Colin on the page for this episode, you'll see that he's got a big smile in almost all of them. It's really obvious that he enjoys the music he plays and the people he plays with, so it's no wonder he's so busy. He brings the positive, he brings the chill, and he's also just a sublime badass, so that helps. Once again, share some pics and videos with us on social media using the hashtag WorkingDrummer. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes if you see fit. Thanks in advance for that. And thanks as always for listening. Take care.